Well, hi everybody. I have a very special guest with us today, Ari Moshe Wolfe. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello.
So Ari is an astrologer. We're going to be talking about some astrology today. Very excited. And you have a channel over here on YouTube as well called Heart and Soul Centered Astrology. And you do kind of a mix, right, between like what's happening right now astrologically and then some like broader themes. I know you just did a video on series recently, right?
Yeah, my work is rooted in evolutionary astrology. That's my training and my lineage. And I look at what are the core evolutionary themes and dynamics at any moment in time. But I'm also just drawn to learn. So I'm always just sort of finding myself drawn towards certain things at certain times. So recently, series has become a deep fascination of mine, and also Vesta as well. So there's always something else emerging for me.
Yeah, this is why we get along. We're both sort of following whatever we want to learn about, whatever we're drawn to. So yeah. Okay,
When I
great.
was when I was
So
really getting into Vesta, by the way, like a good year ago, I'm like, all right, I got to learn more about, to learn the astrology of Vesta, I had to learn more about the history of Vesta. And that's where I found your channel and these two videos. And it's like, wow, this is such great information. So this is like, you've been a part of my learning actually of the astrological Vesta through the knowledge that you've shared.
well, thank you. I think that's one of the really important things about doing these kind of discussions. I learned so much about mythology, about ancient history from having discussions with people who are not historians. So,
Yeah.
astrology, for example, I learned a lot about Roman religion from people who are practicing it today, reconstructing this uh, Roman religious lifestyle. And I really love having these conversations. So I'm really grateful that you're here today with me. And we're going to talk about Vesta, one of our favorite topics over here on the channel. So this video, just for everybody, is going to be part of our celebration of the Vestalia festival. It takes place in June, so I'll be posting this in the middle of this festival. Yeah, so we talked about Vesta, you and I, Ari, last year on your channel, and so we're going to be continuing our discussion today. We're going to go into some of the broad themes, philosophical concepts that have to do with Vesta. So I'll share a little bit of the history and give us some things to think about. And then we'll dive into the astrology of the asteroid Vesta. And then, Ari, you've brought some charts with us that I'm so excited to dig into. So, Vesta is an asteroid. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how asteroids work in, like when you're looking at a natal chart or how you use asteroids in astrology.
I mean, it's still revealing itself to me. Just to say, like, I thought the asteroids were all the same. Then I learned about Ceres and I realized that she's nothing like the other ones, right? So I think my first answer is it's an evolving realization that I think is coinciding with our own ongoing realization of who we are and what's really going on here on this human soul journey. The second answer is in general, I will regard the asteroids as sort of essential facets or qualities that we're working, archetypal dimensions that we're all integrating and working with. But I do stress they generally can't properly be understood out of context, right? Like looking at the function of Vesta, we'll be speaking about the idea of like sacred role or that sacred element that we're tending. We can't look at it in a vacuum. It has to be understood in context with some of the core evolutionary themes of the chart. So I work a lot with the lunar nodes and the outer planets in particular to really understand some of the deeper soul intentions that are at the core of this lifetime. And the asteroids, in my experience, seem to like further embellish the deeper soul themes that we come into this world with. This said, there are certain people where some of these asteroids might be placed in their chart in certain ways where it's like, okay, this is actually an essential part of the journey, right? It's sort of an essential player in these core soul dynamics, and that's, certain cases.
Yeah, so it can be kind of like an extra layer of figuring out what's going on. You start with other things and then look at how Vesta ties in with, other asteroids and planets and all sorts of good
Yes.
stuff.
Yeah.
So are there maybe any circumstances where Vesta might play a more prominent role, like any charts where Vesta might be more prominent or less prominent?
So what I would look for when it comes to that kind of stuff is any strong relationship with the nodes of the moon. The way that I work with the nodes, it's
Okay.
sort of like the general portrait of the kind of context the soul has created in prior lifetimes. That's the south node. So anything in relationship to the south node speaks to a function that we're bringing in that is an essential part of kind of where we left off and what we're integrating or working with or resolving in this lifetime. And then the north node itself would also speak to like sort of you've been working on it, and you're meant to continue developing it. So Vesta on the nodes, Vesta squaring the nodes is very important. We'll have a couple examples, I think, today with that. Anything that squares the nodes is sort of like it's something that wants to be integrated through our understanding of who we are, through the ego structure. Um, Working with Vesta in relationship to Pluto or the outer planets, obviously it's going to bring some more transpersonal, a deeper existential dimension to the Vesta experience. And then kind of in a more mundane way, like it's not like these bigger, larger soul themes, but if you have a Sun Vesta conjunction or Vesta on your ascendant, on the most basic level, Vesta is going to be a very key player in just how you're actualizing yourself and how you're moving through life. And we're going to see examples of that too today.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. All right, so let's just do a little bit of housekeeping with the asteroid Vesta. I wanted to just put up here on the screen a little bit about its history, when it was discovered. So it's only the fourth asteroid to be discovered, and a lot of these early asteroids are named after mythological figures. So Ceres, you have Pallas, you have Juno. Yeah, I mean, it was discovered by this guy named Heinrich Wilhelm Olbers in 1807. Oh, and here's a fun fact about Vesta that I was so excited to find out. There's a crater on the asteroid Vesta called Rhea Silvia. And Rhea Silvia in Roman mythology is the mother of Romulus and Remus, the two founders of Rome, and she herself was a Vestal. It makes
Oh,
their birth a little bit complicated that she was a Vestal. So the crater on Vesta is named after her.
wait, I have a question about that.
Yeah.
So this is like early Rome, right? Um,
Mhm.
I heard, and I don't know if this is true, maybe you can clarify this for me, that there is a point, and this may not be a Rome thing, this might be more like the Vesta archetype pre-Rome, where Vestals or that archetype would have children, and their children would become like the next king. Have you heard of anything of that nature in any kind of cultural context?
Um, I'm not sure. I don't think in the Roman context, with the exception of Rhea Silvia, who is, maybe a really important example of
Huh.
that. Um, but I know that there's a lot of stories of these kind of miraculous births or these unusual births somehow. Think like Immaculate Conception, right? Where someone who is otherwise a virgin or who is meant to be chaste
Huh.
becomes pregnant and gives birth to someone who then becomes very significant later on.
Okay.
But I'm not sure that this might be something that's in a different cultural
Different culture.
context
Yeah,
other
yeah.
than Rome.
Okay.
Yeah. But Rhea Silvia is really interesting because, as I said, she's supposed to be a Vestal. So, how does a Vestal become pregnant without breaking the vow of chastity? Which means that there's alternate versions with different potential fathers. It could have been an immaculate conception, um, or maybe a god is the father or something like that. So yeah, really, really interesting stuff there with Rhea
Definitely
Silvia.
interesting.
Okay, so the last like data point that I have about Vesta is that Vesta is currently moving through the sign of Cancer, but Vesta will move pretty soon into Leo. So I don't know if we want to get into this at all, if there's anything maybe that we could be on the lookout for while Vesta's going through Leo, or is that
Well, I mean, with all of this, you'd have to really give it individual context and apply it to our own charts and our own soul context. But let's think of just I'll give a flow from, Cancer to Leo when it comes to Vesta. So Vesta in Cancer, just think about Cancer itself symbolizing what we experience and what we create to feel nurtured and cared for at home. So here it's the archetype that corresponds to tending the sacred flame or the hearth. But this is like on one level where there's a sense of devotion and purpose to keeping something sacred alive and always moving, always burning, but also a function or a role that we're playing for the community. So when I think of like Vesta in Cancer, I'm thinking about like my mind immediately went to this house I used to live at, where every week, without fail, they would host a potluck and they would hold the ground for that. And it reminds me of Vesta in the sense that they were the center for it. People would gather, and there being this underlying, here in this home, there is nourishment, there's care, there's warmth, and that's I have Cancer in the 11th house, so maybe that's my application because it's involving community coming to a home. But it's really the way in which we're devoting ourselves to caring for and tending to that which nurtures life and nurtures our own growth in this life in a really good way, right? It's a commitment to tending to family, in whatever way that means for each one of us. In Leo, it really points to what two dimensions, like what are we committing to, in terms of our own creative self-actualization? Like what is the unique function or purpose that we each have that would be defined by wherever Leo is in your chart and the ruler of that, the sun. Where is your sun? This is like your life's purpose, right? The Leo sun energy is how we're giving life and energy and meaning to the entire chart, to our entire life. So there needs to be a quality of confidence and self-certainty and a sort of entitlement to say, I exist and I'm going to actualize myself in this unique way. Vesta in Leo is going to be giving that attention to what are the unique roles that only we can say yes to. And if we don't say yes to it in that Vesta kind of way, nothing's going to function. So if we don't have that confidence, here, like the temple that we're upkeeping, the flame that we're igniting, is the flame of our own role, our own purpose, our own believing in ourselves. And, we can think also with Vesta, it's like any kind of issue that where we're not tending to that role. So with Leo, if we're too shy, we're afraid of being seen, um, or if we make too much of ourselves, and we forget that actually we're meant to be playing a role on behalf of the community. It's not just about our own grandiosity. So yeah, that's going to be exciting. Just for each one of us to track. For those that track astrology, you can see it. Where's Vesta in your chart? Really contemplate that house position, where your sun is, and how is that really inviting a redevotion to sacred purpose and that confidence that's needed to embody that.
I think this ties really well into actually the first theme that we wanted to discuss, this idea of your own self, your sovereignty, your independence, your commitment to your own self, balanced with your responsibility towards your community, the collective. We see this show up with Vesta and the Vestal priestesses pretty strongly, especially with the Vestals. So they have this sacred duty, this purpose where they're tending the eternal flame, which symbolizes the community. It symbolizes their safety and security. And it really it's a physical embodiment of the symbolic collective community of Rome. And the Vestals are in charge of maintaining this. It's a very important function. So there's a lot of restrictions on them, what they can and can't do. It's a very long term of service, 30 years. But then on the other hand, they are liberated from what would have been the typical trajectory of life for a Roman woman. So Roman women had to have a guardian, a legal guardian to sign for them in various contexts. And typically, a girl would be under the guardianship of her father. And then when she got married, her guardianship would transfer to her new husband. So the Vestals have to go through, it's actually a ritual, a ceremony to legally emancipate them
Mm.
from this system. So they don't have any guardian. They are entirely independent legally. Yeah, I mean they can act on their own. Their physical body is sacrosanct. You can't touch a Vestal, you can't harm a Vestal. It's a crime to do so. So their physical body is independent, and then they're legally emancipated as well. And they spend all of their time focusing on this collective purpose.
It's so descriptive of just this energy of Vesta. It's so fascinating to me, and it was really insightful when I learned that the Vestal virgins were considered sacrosanct. That really puts an immense, it just really brings a lot of insight to the nature that Vesta function. So we can think of Vesta in the natal chart and in transit for where there is an underlying sacred purpose that we are guided, right, designed to uphold and keep sustaining. My one of my first teachers, Jeff Green. I'm sorry, he's my first. Adam Gainsberg, who also studied with Jeff Green's works, described it as if like the wall is falling down, if the house is crumbling, Vesta is where you're holding up the posts. And I find
Ah.
Adam's description of that really right on because you know what your purpose is here and you're devoted to upholding that function. So it carries within it this quality of, I know what I'm for and I'm
Mm.
committing myself to that. So like, there's a quality of like, I'm waking up in the morning and I'm lighting the candle, I'm lighting the flame, I'm keeping the metaphor of that sacred fire lit, the continuity of the sacred and whatever that corresponds to. I'm keeping that going. So there absolutely is this interesting combination of like this commitment to this role. And the Vesta archetype in general can be those who are taking care of the altar, keeping the fire lit in the sanctuary or in the church. Different cultures have had that role of those who are tending the sacred spaces. We're going to look at a chart example of a friend of mine who is a fire tender and it keeps the
Mm.
sacred flame for ceremonies. I mean, it's very direct Vesta archetype. And there's a sense of there's a commitment to upholding something that is for the service of the collective. And it's like that it sanctifies our own being. Like I just love the idea of sacrosanct. Just when we are committed to sacred work, we become sanctified within ourselves. There's a purity of mind in that. But you're bringing forward that notion of sovereignty, right? They are independent. They had their own. They weren't like other women where they were owned by men. So that facet of sovereignty mixed with commitment to something that is necessary to fulfill and keep going is really an important part of understanding and unpacking the Vesta function, and also how that's expressed sort of historically and how we integrate between those two elements of commitment and sovereignty with Vesta.
Yeah, and I love what you're saying about maintenance as well, because it's not just I am doing something for the collective once, or I am doing something for the collective right now. It's a long-term thing. The Vestals were in the service of the goddess for 30 years, and they did the same thing every day for those 30 years. It's the long-term, um, you know, think of like the caretaking of the temple.
Right.
It's- yeah, I think that's a huge part of it. So maybe we can look at a chart example.
Sure. Um, so what I'll do is I'll bring forward these examples, and I think I'll use it as an opportunity to flesh out some more nuance in understanding sort of the Vesta archetype. Let me start with this one. This is actually, I mean, to me, it's an utterly, absolutely fascinating example. Um, this is Michael Jackson. So pretty much all of us know this guy. And this is what I really want to speak to this dichotomy of like sovereignty, but also like this commitment, which, like all things in astrology, there's a distortion of the expression, and we can even see throughout history every single archetype. Of course, we're using like the Roman names, but these archetypes aren't Roman. Like these archetypes themselves exist collectively and have expressed at different levels of awareness or consciousness throughout time. I think it's helpful to understand that the larger context of the Vesta archetype um, really does speak to where there has been this tension between this sacred role and a lot of distortion around how, I'll say it this way, it's like the Vestal virgins were chaste, right? They're celibate. As I've learned, that the Vesta function also corresponds to, in ancient times, I think this was like in Sumeria, where men would come back from war, and there are these temples where women would initiate, and to help men reintegrate into society, there would be a sexual initiation. And this is something that I understand existed at a time where sexuality was probably a lot less confusing and a lot less distorted. But let's just like unpack this idea for a moment. This is not necessarily about Michael, but I'm leading into it. Um, the idea of belonging to a temple and, serving, I'll stop the share for this part just to complete this thought, serving in this sacred role, um, but you have a lot of status, like there's a lot of importance. Progressively, it became okay, you have this role to play, you're being provided for, so give sex and you're going to, receive all that you need, right? Like it became more and more of a distortion from this is a sacred service to this is a role that you have to play. And we can really see that Vesta function oftentimes expressing in that way where there's knowledge or a memory on some level of that more initiatory healing function, especially when it comes to sexuality, but where that actually has become distorted. So interestingly enough, and I think this can also be a Venusian thing in different ways, um, different forms of sex work, but even where it becomes like just the idea of I have a role to play and I'm going to get something for it, but I'm a free person and I don't belong to any one individual, right? That can be Venus because Venus corresponds to exchange and reciprocity and commodification of the body and sensual like pleasure, right? But there's also a way in which this corresponds to Vesta, where there's like a knowledge of this used to be like a service, and I was respected and held in society for this role, but that becomes progressively distorted and confused as well. So I think a part of working with the Vesta for many souls is working with these two dimensions of there's a sacredness and a purity, but we also have to understand like what does it mean to be in relationship to that and also maintain our own sovereignty. For the Vestal virgins to be sacrosanct, but to also be literally virgins, that says a lot about how that society regarded sexuality, meaning sexuality wasn't a part of the purification function of the Vestal virgins. That says so much about how we regard the Vesta archetype, right? Like, so for those that might be wondering, how does Vesta have anything to do with sexuality? Just the Vestal virgin says it by its name, right? If they if the word virgin wasn't in the title, it wouldn't imply the significance of sexuality in the Vesta function. And it says what we think of as pure. I think Demetra George mentioned this somewhere, or I heard her say this, something about like there can even be like within the Vesta function a sort of promiscuity that then feels like, dirty or shameful or wrong or weird, because I think there's a sense of I don't belong to any one person, but at the same time that can feel like okay, then I'm just, you know, available for everyone, but is it sacred, right? Is it like healing? And I think this is a part of the deeper understanding of Vesta. We really understand sacrosanct, but we're not in this dichotomy of separating spirit and flesh, right? Which is what we've done for a while. I think there's an understanding of Vesta that is um, inclusive of something that I think the ancients knew of how what is holy and sacred is a lot more embodied and isn't like this untouchable thing that we've known throughout recent history. So I think that's a meaningful dimension. And now this does, in a way, bring us back to our friend Michael Jackson here. Before I go to the chart and define these elements, let's just appreciate that from early in life, he was under the immense scrutiny of his father. He would wake up in the morning and practice, come back from school, he would practice. And not just him, but his entire family, but he got extra attention because he was extra talented. Like his father recognized early in life that Michael in particular was really talented. So he really pushed him to train. And we can see like this huge stellium of Leo and Virgo in the
Mm.
sixth house. It strongly emphasizes, of course. And by the way, for those watching, I use the Porphyry house system. There are many house systems, many ways of doing this work. Um, so you might have seen this chart, but in a different house system. Right? The combination of Leo and Virgo in the sixth, obviously, just in general, is the refinement and the articulation, the perfection of one's particular creative craft. With Venus there as well, it's a hyper immense of self awareness and self focus and self analytical, right? Really refining his own beauty and his own craft. So we got that dimension. It's obviously there's a lot to unpack just in that alone. But we have Vesta in Cancer in the fifth house. I
Mm.
mean, this looks like the altar boy. Like, Vesta in the fifth house is literally the altar boy, right? It's like the
Mm.
child that's getting up in church and lighting the candles, okay? Um, it squares the node. And this is an example. Again, when I see Vesta in a really strong relationship to the nodal axis, it's always going to be really important, really significant. This is like his performance and the cultivation of his craft being here that Vesta function. And it's like designated from early in life to play that role. And I think we can see with the square to that south node in Aries in the second, this would really speak to a deep sense of aloneness, right? There's like a lot of isolation and aloneness and kind of really being withdrawn within himself. But it also speaks to an immense amount of energy being directed towards crafting his skill, crafting his art, right? Naturally that Libra in the eighth is like wanting to be known, intimacy, connection, being loved and accepted. There's a lot there around like intimacy and being alone versus sharing. But this Vesta Cancer in the fifth strongly speaks to um, just the performative cultivation. It's like he's holding the space that the whole depends upon for him to do it properly. So just a really great example. Interestingly enough, and I don't know if this is true, but a doctor that worked with him wrote this tell-all book about his life or things that Michael shared with him. And he said that apparently his father, so his father was very harsh. You kind of see his father was like his like manager, tour manager, and like boss leader. Like you have Saturn on the midheaven in Sagittarius. Like his father was like the opportunistic tour manager that was telling him, "Here's your job, here's your training, here's who you have to become." And but it was very harsh and very strict and violent as well. Apparently, according to this man, his father gave him puberty suppressing hormones um, at around age 13 so that Michael would maintain his beautiful, like, high pitch angelic voice. And I don't know if that's true, but it would make a lot of sense because it's like Cancer in the fifth house is the child, right? It's like that is like the prime example of a child that is loved and celebrated and important, like Cancer, but in the fifth, like you're a special, you're a golden child. And then there's sort of like a castration effect with that Aries, which is testosterone and whatever, in the second house, which is also like a sense of life, vitality, and self-value and self-worth. So it's interesting, just whether it's true or not, that story itself archetypally says something. It speaks to this chart.
Yeah, and whether or not that specific story is true, I mean, it is well known that Michael Jackson had a higher voice. Even when he was speaking, he would speak very softly and at a higher pitch. So,
And I'm
yeah,
not sure why that would. I mean, I don't know why he had that voice his entire life or what. Yeah, it's an interesting thing, but it's almost like you can feel in his energy when he speaks, the boy. You can feel
yeah.
some sort of unresolved boy in there.
Yeah, there's a lot of well, I've seen like several documentaries about Michael Jackson,
Oh, cool.
but one thing that keeps coming up is this sort of like quest for childhood, feeling
Uh,
like he never got a real childhood. So he tries to enact that in various ways. Like for example, you would see like pictures and videos from inside his house, and there's all this like Peter Pan paraphernalia, like
uh,
pictures and even like a statue, I think, of Peter Pan, and he just idolized Peter Pan. He wanted to be young forever. He didn't want to grow up. Um, he spent a lot of time around children as well. So yeah, you can see that for sure.
that's really interesting. Yeah, it's almost like that Vesta function being relative to the Aries, and you'll find this a lot with the Aries archetype. It's like things that happen really early in life. And if you have like a square to an Aries node, it can be there's something that started really early that, it's either like developmental processes being cut off, or a training that begins from early in life. Um, and I think there's like, sort of like there's a stunting in emotional development and like the necessary care that a child needs, Cancer fifth house, that you can really see with this Vesta square to the nodes. That is really interesting. Cool. Should I move on to
Yeah,
the next chart?
sure.
Okay. So this is a man that I think is really cool. I literally every quote I
Yeah.
found was like a good quote. You know what I'm saying? Like I could just
hmm
randomly pick any quote and it'll be descriptive of this Vesta. So I actually, to be honest, like people that are alive, I even if they're well known, I do often try my best within reason, if unless they're like super duper well known, whatever, to like get consent to share their chart. I emailed him, didn't hear a response. I didn't think I would, but I want to respect. Everyone's chart is very personal, intimate. So I'm consciously making this choice. Um, to share his chart. He is really famous, and I'm sure he'll never know about this video. But um, that's like an ethical piece in astrology in this community in general that I think is really to be considered. Like when we're sharing a chart, to really recognize what we're doing. It's, and there's a sort of like gray line around people that are kind of already in the public and we know everything about them already, and then it kind of makes it a little bit more okay, but it's a thing to tackle with a little bit. Okay, so he has Vesta on the ascendant. So if you have any planet on the ascendant, without speaking to the larger karmic implication, just that alone, on a more superficial level, says you're going to have a very Vestal orientation. Like that's how you're going to initiate life experience. You are going to be carrying that on your sleeve, so to speak. So your ascendant, you can think of it as how you instinctively individuate life experience moment to moment. It operates on an instinctual level, and it's like the choices that we're making that allow us to engage with life experience and move into the next phase, move into the next phase. Always, right? It's how we're orienting. We're going to learn a lot about ourselves through our behavior, through our actions, that will kind of like lead to like new reactions, and then we kind of refine and we act again and we grow. So there's always movement and development, and that's why anything close to the ascendant, especially if it's in the first house, will very much carry a very like this is how you're acting and moving through life instinctively. So it's also going to speak to a lot of like sort of initial subjectivity, but then a growing of intelligence potentially as a soul becomes more aware of themselves. So just looking at that alone, his life and how he lives is so descriptive of that. Um, we can unpack a lot, and again, like looking at the nodes, his Aquarius Sun and Pallas Athene actually square the nodes of the moon. So like Aquarius in the first house is already very activated. Like his Aquarius Sun is incredibly charged. Like anything that squares the nodes, again, is like something we're really integrating and working with, and a lot of attention is being placed there. Some people will struggle with it their whole life. Other people will really begin to heal and bring a lot of attention to this integration point. So it's a lot of fire, right? Sun, first house, right? And that's sort of everything in the first house is conditioned by the ruler of that first house, Aquarius, and then we have Vesta on that. So let me just read you some quotes, and then I'll speak to his story, okay? You are in danger of living a life so comfortable and soft that you will die without ever realizing your true potential. Only you can master your mind, which is what it takes to live a bold life filled with accomplishments most people consider beyond their capability. You want to be uncommon amongst uncommon people, period. Okay. Aquarius corresponds to the impulse for liberation and the freedom from the known, freedom from precedent. When you put Aquarius wherever you put Aquarius, the underlying basic intention is to liberate from the conditioning. Thus, we're going to be faced with our limits, our conditioning, and the known. This can be social conditioning, what we've established, patterns or traumas that have kind of kept us suppressing parts of our own individuality. But in that freeing ourselves up, we access a dimension of our being that exists beyond the threshold of everything else that we've known, meaning it's like what is when we're not filtering our perceptions through a conditioned layer. So in the first house, Aquarius is freeing up the instinctual body. First house is, energy. We need the energy to go, to move, to do things. And naturally, for everyone, first house is going to say we're going to meet confrontations and obstacles, and we're going to have to cultivate more strength and resiliency to push through them. It's an Aries energy. So developing greater stamina, perseverance, self-leadership, self-trust to go, to do, right? Like first house energy is you're the first one to do it. You have a lot of strength, a lot of energy. You're jumping into the experience and you're going where you've never been before. And it's scary. Like for those that have a lot of first house planets, you'll know this. Like it's inherently existentially scary and anxious because you're going somewhere you've never done before. And once you make that choice, you can't unchoose it. And the choice that you're making means you're not making these other choices. And like, what if you don't make it? What if you go too far, too fast, too quickly, and you fail, right? Like there's a lot of pushing ourselves and needing to get stronger, needing to cultivate more perseverance and self-trust and self-leadership to be able to go through it all. So any kind of goal, it's like, I'm gonna, I want to lift 300 pounds or whatever. That becomes a goal. And then, well, I have to work towards that. I have to really strengthen and develop myself. What's my mission? What's my purpose? What am I acting for? That's why first house can be defensive, can be war, can be something that we're acting to achieve some sort of goal that it's also scary. You may not achieve that goal. You might be killed. You may not make it, right? So Aquarius first house is freeing up the ability to act. His whole trip is when we say we can't go any further, that's the mind getting in the way. Free up the mind. And you can go further than you realize you can go because the mind decides when to stop, not the body. And his whole thing is pushing the limits, first house, of how strong we are, how far we can go, how much stamina and strength we can point and direct ourselves towards in life. He's done things like running 100 miles in 17 hours and just pushing himself beyond where his mind believed he could. But then he realized it was a choice in the mind. He did these crazy trainings of like getting his body really fit in a very short period of time so he can get into the Navy SEALs, just so he could experience what it's like to overcome his obstacles. So he was like also first house, he can be traumatized by a lot of violence, like sort of that his father being very violent and there being a lot of trauma. So you can dissociate from that sort of masculine yang energy. Aquarius can be dissociative. So like I'm not able to make choices. I don't have that like freedom to just go and do something new and push myself to a new threshold. I'm sort of numbed out, right? So he was living numbed out for a while, but felt the distaste of all this unactualized potential. So the Aquarius, I'm going to set my mind to do whatever it takes to overcome my obstacles and my limitations. That's the essence here. I mean, just like the quality of Vesta is that he's holding the torch of overcoming the obstacles of the mind to achieve greater strength, greater goals, greater capacity. He is that Vesta energy. And again, it's on the ascendant. He really expresses that. So anyone who doesn't know David Goggins, follow him and you'll get how he is carrying that Vesta energy in a very palpable way. Let me just read a couple more quotes. A warrior is
Yeah.
a guy that goes, I'm here today, I'll be here again tomorrow and the next day. It's a person who puts no limits on what's possible. You are giving up instead of getting hard. Tell the truth about the real reasons for your limitations, and you will turn that negativity, which is real, into jet fuel. Those odds stacked against you will become a damn runway. Right? It's like
Mm.
Aquarius in the first house. You have like a group of people standing up against you. So you're perceiving fear and limits. I can't go. I can't go. He figured out how he could use those fears and use it as fuel. There's this one interview where he's like, you know, talking to some guy. He's like, well, what if like, you wake up in the morning and like you didn't get any sleep, and he's like, keep on going, keep on going. All right, you didn't get any sleep last night, or your honey wants you to stay in bed. Keep on going. You just got fired. You have no energy. Keep on going. He's like, see, all of that, man, all of that. People use that and they stay weak. They stay in bed. Me, when that comes, I use that as fuel. Like, see, it's like that beautiful ability to objectify one's reality. It's like the presence of fear
Hmm.
in the face of action, using that to then motivate. Therefore, I need to act. It's fascinating psychology. That's like the brilliance, really, of Aquarius in the first house of being able to overcome these obstacles. When you think that you're done, you're only 40% into what your body's capable of doing. That's just the limits that we put in. You think of Vesta in the first house or Vesta in Aries archetypally is the archetype of the Olympic torch run.
Hmm.
Running long distance, superhuman. Like you have to be so athletic to do that. And by the way, I was actually looking at researching the Olympic torch and the charts around the Olympics, and I didn't go deeply enough into that rabbit hole. But the Sydney Olympics, I was looking at the day where the torch was the run began, and interesting, Vesta was on the south node in Capricorn. It's this
Mm.
run that spans through all these different countries and nations. But that's just like one. I mean, that wasn't there every single Olympics. That's just one correlation that I saw. The first one that I saw that I was fascinated by. But yeah, I'm interested in just like things like that where old practices come back. It's cool to see like what's happening astrologically when that's kind of reignited. Okay, last quote. If you want to be one of the few to defy those trends in our ever softening society, you'll have to be willing to go to war with yourself and create a whole new identity, which requires an open mind. It's Aquarius first house right there. So,
Yeah, I think this is such a great example to look at. And when you said you were going to bring this chart in, I listened to some interviews as well. So a couple things that I found that I thought really spoke to Vesta themes is he says that he doesn't like public speaking. He's introverted. He is
uh,
he'll say he has no qualms about saying, I'm here with you on this podcast, and I don't want to be here because this is not my nature. But he feels that it is his duty to share what
uh,
he's learned in this journey of strengthening his body and mastering his mind, as he says, that even though he doesn't want to be a public figure, he does it because he feels a responsibility to share what he's learned and to help others achieve things, maybe not the same things that he did, but achieve this kind of mindset that he's advocating for. So I thought that was really interesting. And just the fact that that first 100-mile marathon that he ran, I don't know if it's called a marathon, but the 100-mile race that he ran, he did it because um, he was trying to raise money for a charity. And he felt it was he was a Navy SEAL, and then some of his colleagues had died. and he was trying to honor them by doing this race and raising
Mm,
money for this charity.
mm,
So again, you see this kind of, I'm going to do something that relates to me directly in my own physical person, but it is for this wider group, this greater collective goal. And then the last thing that I just, maybe this is a little too cute, but he used this metaphor for trying to condition his body and his mind through suffering. And he says that if you want to make a sword that is really strong, you have to repeatedly put it into the fire
yeah.
to harden it. And so, a little on the nose, but I thought I wanted to bring that up because that
Yeah.
stuck out to me as like a Vestal kind of metaphor there.
Absolutely. And I would say just, with these strong karmic dynamics, the Aquarius sun squaring the node, it's like this is a situation where you'll see, okay, yeah, there's some kind of like warrior purposeful type role that was cut off short. Like this is like the karmic context of like failing to meet a goal or an obstacle and like the pressure of that remaining within his soul, leading to this incredible focus to integrate that and reconnect with wherever I was limited or I couldn't keep on going, I got to get stronger. I got to overcome whatever defeated me. He says his favorite movie is Rocky, or one of his favorite movies, and he spoke about Rocky in this one battle between Rocky and this other guy. It's like round 14, where Rocky's knocked out, and it's like he just falls. Like he can't even defend himself from the punches. And they think that Rocky lost that round, and everyone's like, "Stay down, Rocky, stay down." And then Rocky gets up, and the round continues, and it's like this moment where he just returns. Like it looks like you're done, and the opponent was just like, "Oh, this again," right? You can tell, and it was that moment where the game turned. Something in Rocky's mind said, "You don't have to be done." And that's it's clear why that's his favorite scene. Okay, should we go to a
Yeah,
different chart?
sure.
Okay. So another famous example that I don't mind using this guy's chart, just looking in my database. All right, Paul Simon. He has a Sun Vesta conjunction in Libra in the second house. I'm like, oh, this makes so much sense. So, Libra in the second house is harmony, is music. And it's also like, anything manifesting in the second house is also poetic. Like the nature of the second house being artful and embodied and graceful. And it's not just like how we survive and how we live, it's also how we embody life as grace, as beauty. With Libra in there, it really does bring in that harmony element and that musical element. He's so good at harmony. He has such an ear for music and harmony and beauty. And his South Node is also like in that seventh house, Pisces, for divine harmony. And, in his early collaboration with Garfunkel, just being this beautiful duo of two people harmonizing together. So there's just a lot to say around like his relationship to harmony in general. Both, archetypally, that sun is also like in conjunct with an orb of that south node, and Vesta is a little out of orb, but they're like in the vicinity of that. So what was meaningful for me about this in terms of Vesta is I think, okay, his music, his art from a second house point of view, right? Like the second house is where we're spending a lot of time with ourselves and we're crafting our craft. His music is that. Like his songs and what he's put out there is such a Vesta thing. He's constantly bringing forward music. And his whole life has been about that. His whole life has been this devotion to like I have this and recently it's like he channeled this like this like poetry that became his most recent album, and it's all just like he felt like it had to happen. Like there's this purpose, there's this function that he's meant to play in this world, and I really regard Paul Simon as like he brought this music and this harmony into this world, and this is a role and a post that he is here to play in this lifetime. So I don't have much more to say. It's just observing the apropos placement for that Vesta conjunct his sun. Like this is his creative life force, his creative purpose. I don't know if you have
Yeah,
anything that you want to
yeah.
say to that.
Um, I not too much. I don't know all that much about Paul Simon, but I think I heard him say that the title of his most recent album like came to him in a dream. He was just
Yeah.
like inspired. Um, and as you said, he felt like it had to be brought out into the world. So yeah, that's a good chart example there.
Yeah. And it, you know, trines
Yeah.
his Jupiter and Gemini in the 10th, and that's to me it's like the loquaciousness and the generosity of his lyrics as well. It's just there's a brilliance and sort of like a humor and like a skillful double meaning in a lot of his own lyrics, and it's just that Gemini Libra dynamic involving Vesta just feels like his ability to make art and produce beauty and lyrics and all that kind of stuff. Okay, let's go to the next chart. So this is a friend of mine who has given me permission to share her chart. I'm just really focusing here on a part of the chart. Again, we have Vesta like literally right on the ascendant. And I don't think I knew that she has Vesta on the ascendant when I didn't. I've seen her chart, but it wasn't in my mind where Vesta was. I just knew she's a fire keeper. And I thought of her like, oh, I got to see where Vesta is. And I reached out, looked at her chart, Vesta on the ascendant. It makes so much sense. So let me just share what I asked her to just share. What's her relationship to tending fire? Just talk to me about it. And this is what she wrote to me. I know fire directly as humanity's first love, the source of all creation, the burning sacred heart. Every time we ignite a toroidal field that is a fire, connects us, our center, to the fire in the center of the earth, magma. And the fire in the center of our solar system, the sun, it holds an energy of centering for me. As I tend fire, I tend aspects of this within myself. And therefore I teach others how to work in this way. Through friction fire, we are alchemizing carbon back into starlight. Trees are carbon beings sequestering starlight, the sun's light, and when we bring fire out of wood, we are releasing the starlight back into its origins. That's so beautiful. It's a harmonious exchange of us breathing life and life breathing us infinitely. My role as a fire keeper comes with many lifetimes of great learning, which I believe all of us hold in our bones. It really feels like I've just been chosen to be a fire's assistant or emissary, and I'm simply introducing people to a wise elder. It's between the person and the elemental that will establish healing, empowerment, transmutation, clearing, renewal, whatever is of need. So she has
Man.
Vesta in Capricorn on the ascendant. This is a social. Now here we're dealing with the Capricorn archetype. So the general Vesta function of, you know, something that serves the community or the whole, it's not always going to be like a job or a role that you're playing in society per se, right? Like it's not always going to be you have an actual responsibility to get there on time or people are depending on you to perform this thing. When it's in Capricorn, we're specifically relating to here is a area of personal self-development and cultivation and discipline to perform a role and a responsibility to perform this role. Here on the ascendant, there's a underlying leadership, right? Like to me, this is a soul who has been holding this like elder leadership position in past lives as a fire keeper. But it's also like bringing in like the elders, the wisdom lineage. And I love how she describes fire as an elder, you know, Capricorn, Vesta, in the first house. And with this Vesta is this a lot of greater energy. It's ruled by Saturn also, which is in her first house conjunct her sun. So there's a lot of strong, I'm bringing forward this leadership energy to uphold the sacred in community. And it's my responsibility to be performing this function in this role. Just like the respect and the integrity with which she speaks to um, fire. So fire being first house, right? You know, but also Vesta. Like here, like it's a sacred flame and the wisdom and the teachings of the eternal flame that she is speaking to here. And the eternal flame being that which she connects to within her soul, within all beings, and how we can connect to that through our relationship with the sun, and what the sun really represents from within our own being, and how fire connects us with the sun. It's like so beautiful. So, you know, she tends fire to be clear. And this is like, I don't know the specific scope. I know she's for a long time, I think from early in this life, actually, she's played this role. A young person, but very matured, Capricorn first house. of doing, lodge ceremony and being the fire tender, you know, being the one that's facilitating the fire. And the fire is a big part of the medicine and the healing that's used in these ceremonies. And again, anyone who's tending to the sacred flame, you got to make sure the flame is lit so that you have the stones that you can put in the lodge. It's like you have that responsibility to really respect and keep the fire going so that we can receive its medicine.
Yeah, what an awesome chart. My mind is going in so many different directions here. We've been talking about the elements a lot on this channel recently, so I've been digging into what people in antiquity said about fire and what
Huh.
they thought about fire. Um, where is it? Yeah, so okay, so many things. Um, One thing that I think you see right here in this description that your friend has given about fire, it's the source of all creation. I'm thinking of the Prometheus myth, where Prometheus brings fire to people, and the way that it's described in the ancient sources, it is really the source of everything. It is the source of all human technology, and it gives humans the ability to look after themselves in a way that they hadn't prior to the discovery of fire. Um, and it is like this first primordial beginning. In a lot of the different discussions of the elements, fire is the first element or the most pure, the most fundamental element, and then the others, air, water, and earth build out from there.
Huh. That's so
So
interesting.
really just yeah, it's the source of everything. It's the source of knowledge. It knows things and it can impart uh life along with air as like the sort of like the spark of consciousness is breathed into people through the holy breath of air. So those two working pretty closely together.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because um, with the her Saturn in Aquarius conjunct the Sun too, that Aquarius energy has a lot of Promethean, like there's a lot of Prometheus quality in that. So it's like that higher spin on that sort of rebellious, I'm stealing fire, but it's like a service for humanity. Like using this energy of freedom in a way that's really serving the collective evolution.
Yeah. Prometheus took it upon himself to give this gift to humans.
Cool.
Really, really cool. Another thing that I'm seeing here in this description is talking about fire in the center of the earth and fire being maybe closely connected to earth. I was just reading I think it's in Ovid, how Vesta herself is not only representing fire and the eternal flame, but also the earth herself. She's equated to Terra, literally the land.
Huh.
And there's supposed to be fire like deep down in the earth, which we know to be true, but which I think was only speculation in antiquity with things like volcanoes. So she is fire, but she is earth as well.
Cool. That's really interesting. This brings up this reflection in general. It's like our understanding of the elements is like it might seem so concrete, but then there's so many different dimensions and spins on it. And I think in different ages we'll even find very different ways of conceiving and thinking of the element. Like I've never even thought of fire as a starting point. I've always thought of water as like this, right? But it's like
Mm.
the way you express that is such a beautiful spin on it too. So I really appreciate that, how like all of these different dimensions can be conceived of or internalized in very different ways. So I have one more quick example to share with everyone.
Sure.
This is just my own chart, sharing a very small part of it. Um, just noting that I have Vesta and Gemini in the 10th house. And so like that's in general, you can say that's the role or the function of making sacred knowledge available. And 10th house being anything that we're disciplining or we're creating a structural reality or a foundation for it. And so Vesta and Gemini in the 10th would have something to do with keeping the flame of this knowledge or this information accessible and making it available, preserving it. Um, it was during the time that Vesta was squaring my Vesta, transiting Vesta right here was in Virgo, moving over my ascendant. So of course, anything entering the ascendant, crossing into your first house in transit, is going to be initiating a new cycle and very emphasized for that time. So Vesta was kind of moving back and forth in retrograde and direct cycles over my ascendant and squaring my natal Vesta during this time. And it was during that time that I was taking this knowledge that I've trained in, that I've received, Gemini 10th house, and actually structuring it to create an actual training program, to create an actual curriculum that I can then use to disseminate and teach and instruct others. Um, and so that was just for me a very tangible, concrete example of me directly in that instance learning more about, oh, this is my Vesta. Like I'm like grasping another dimension of what it's like to be embodying my own Vesta through a very clear transit. And that's a thing for all of us. Like you can look at where is your own Vesta, look at transits to your Vesta, just pay attention. Look at transiting Vesta and see what's emerging. What I always suggest for, learning astrology, like you mentioned this in the beginning, um, like you this there's a natural curiosity for many things, and studying the mythology and learning about, you know, the mythological context for these archetypes is so helpful for understanding the astrology. So is learning the astronomy. It's like everything is interconnected. It's pretty holographic the way this stuff works. So it's you never just learn one thing. You're actually learning many things, and you're using that to build a greater framework of understanding. And so for us to learn about Vesta, we have some ideas and concepts that we've shared today, but the actual direct experience of it, which is what's most important to me, is when we actually have the taste of it ourselves. And that happens through observing it. That happens through tracking and actually taking it upon ourselves, not to just like memorize or learn an idea and then apply that idea, but to actually create nurture the grounds for direct experience. And it's within all of our reach once we learn how to track transits and just pay attention to these movements day to day.
Yeah, I think that's so important to not just hone in on one or two ideas about, oh, Vesta, it's the eternal flame, and the Vestal virgins were virgins. You can go so much deeper and so much broader than that as you're looking through your own chart. And it's helpful to look back even at things that happened to you while Vesta was prominently placed in your chart. I know we talked in our last conversation a little bit about my chart and my Vesta return, uh, my more recent Vesta return, where and I didn't know this at the time. I only you brought this to my attention last year that Vesta was transiting through my natal Vesta at the time that I was starting this YouTube channel and literally making videos about Vesta
Exactly, yeah.
within that however long it was, a couple of months. That it is just so on the nose a
Yeah.
little bit. And you talked about the Vesta return. I really like this word that you used, reignition,
Mm,
just because it has that kind of flame element to it. You're relighting a spark, but it's not necessarily changing your direction so much as it is kind of like recentering or refocusing.
exactly,
I don't
exactly.
know if you want to talk about Vesta returns a little
Ab
bit.
Absolutely, yeah. And just to really re-emphasize that, since it's gonna manifest for us in all different ways, but we can have a vested return or just throughout our life come to these moments where we're reconnecting to that sense of, oh, here is what I am to do. Here are the sacred grounds to preserve. And the story of Hanukkah in the Jewish tradition is a really great example of that because the Vesta archetype was the menorah, which was the candles that were always lit. That was desecrated, and it was actually like the Greeks made it to like a temple for Zeus. And then there's like a Maccabean revolt, and they reconsecrated the temple. One of my rabbit holes in preparation for today's talk was to figure out the date of that actual
Mhm.
day of cut it in the Hebrew calendar. That was the 25th day of the month of Kislev. Back then, This is like 164 BCE. It's like the Hebrew calendar wasn't the way it is now. It was a little bit more all over the place. And so it was a little bit of an. I found a woman who calls herself the Jewish astrologer, and she's really knowledgeable. And she actually helped me, with all likelihood, find the actual date, which translates to like
Mm.
165 BCE, December 24th. And interestingly, that was like the sun was at 0 degrees Capricorn. I don't have any insights based on that date, and I'm hesitant because I don't know for sure that it's accurate. But the story of that experience, the temple was ransacked, and I mean, I would actually be interested in looking at the chart of when was a temple first built, and looking at the
Mm.
rededication of the temple relative to when the first temple relative to when that temple was built, right? Because that would make more sense, right? It's like relative to the natal chart. Um, it was such a big deal because it's returning to this, and the whole m- miracle of Hanukkah was about the menorah. That Vesta archetype was to be lit, but there wasn't enough oil to last more than a day, but it lasted 8 days. And so it's like the significance of what it represents, that that light is still going. Um, so when you have a Vesta return, there can be that reignition. I'm going to share a personal story because I had a Vesta return just earlier this year. So we saw I have Vesta and Gemini in the 10th house. And this year I was beginning the fourth year now of teaching my training program. And I had an idea to make it an open enrollment structure. I've been teaching it for 3 years with a close cohort, had alumni doing practice. I mean, this whole ecosystem has developed since I started this in 2021. And I'm like, I feel like I need to, I've been wanting to just loosen the boundaries for whatever reasons so that people can come and go and not have to wait till next year to enroll again. But no one was enrolling. No one wanted an open enrollment structure. And then I received some dreams and guidance. Um, Long story short, directing me in the opposite direction of where I was going. And what's that? Well, 10th house, more boundaries. And as
Mm.
I've been teaching this training program, it's been even more clarifying as Vesta is in a new phase, right? Actually, Vesta right now is approaching a semi-sextile. That's 30-degree separation from my natal Vesta. That semi-sextile, those first 30 degrees are almost like the first moment in the cycle where you begin to develop some level of subjective awareness of where things are growing into. That's even further expressed at 45 degrees. And then at that 60-degree sextile, there's a lot more creative insight and awareness of what is actually unfolding, right? So relative to this Vesta moving into this new phase, as I've been teaching this, the lesson that I've been learning is I'm actually called upon to metaphorically create a really solid temple structure foundation for this teaching. And the more the boundaries are defined, the more I'm really willing to invest in the infrastructure and the structure that I'm creating, the more that will actually allow for this infrastructure to grow progressively in future years and become more sustainable and grounded, like the building blocks of that 10th house Capricorn energy. Really solid structure. And it's the very opposite of what I was trying to do. And that Vesta in my chart opposes a lot of fourth house Sag, and that there's a whole tension here around like that Vesta really in a sense is sort of grounding all of the Sagittarius energy and giving it stable, grounded commitment and focus and structure and mastery. So that's my experience of the Vesta return. And because of how Vesta and it squares my Virgo, so that can be a lot of procrastination and self-doubt. So the way it was for me was I was trying to do something else, and my soul program said, "You're not going to be able to. It's just not happening, Ari." So I had to rededicate myself to the actual path. But within that, there was just like a renewed clarity of what it is I'm actually doing here, like a strengthening of that Vesta role. And for me, when I think about my teaching from the point of view of Vesta, it's so helpful because, oh yeah, the curriculum that I'm creating, the structure, the foundation, 10th house that I'm establishing for the teachings, for this knowledge, Gemini, I feel like I'm like really tending this sacred ground, and the devotion and the care and the thoughtfulness and attention that I put into that, I know is going to serve a greater function beyond me. So I feel that Vesta quality for myself very palpably.
Wow, yeah, that's a really great insight, and I love that you're talking about the kind of everything that we've discussed already, this tending the sacred flame, maintaining the temple, serving others. It all kind of ties together in the story you just told. And I found this in my Vesta return as well, the one I was just talking about. You weren't reinventing the class. You weren't teaching a different class. You're just changing the way that you did it.
Yes.
I wasn't, abandoning ancient history. I was just taking it out of where I had been before, leaving academia and redirecting it, changing how I did it and who I was involving, right? I'm meeting all sorts of people. I never would have talked to you about any of this if I were in the classroom. So it just sort of like redirecting what is ultimately the same goal or the same activity that I'm doing, but moving it into a different space.
Yeah. You know what I just realized? I don't know if you remember this. Do you remember where Vesta was when we did our talk last year? It was in
Oh
Capricorn.
gosh. Oh, really?
I remember because we were looking at the charts and talking about. I remember that it was in Capricorn, so I just realized we're doing this talk um, at the midpoint of a Vesta cycle because
Oh,
Capricorn and
wow.
Cancer are opposite each other.
Man, it keeps going. The more you look, the more you find, right?
It is, yeah, yeah, and you can't make this stuff up either. It's like the correlations are infinite.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you wanted to speak about that we didn't get to,
Yeah, let me tune
or?
in. Let me see if there's anything else that feels helpful. Nothing else comes up for me.
All right, well then maybe this is a
What were
good
the
place
what were the
to.
topics that we had that we noted ahead of time? Maybe I should look at
We
those
were
again.
gonna do, sovereignty versus duty to the collective.
Mhm.
We were gonna talk about sexuality, which we touched on at least a little bit, and then the eternal flame.
Okay, I think we've gotten those basic points. Yeah, I would end with and so much more. Um,
Yeah.
there's okay. Last night I was at the farmer's market with my family, and we're sitting with a friend, and I'm looking at her, and I never do this. Like I'm not the kind of guy to do this kind of thing. I'm like, can I look at your chart? And I told her, here's why. I really want to know where your Vesta is. I'm preparing for this talk tomorrow, and everything about you is just like, again, like my other friend that I looked at her chart, the fire tender, I had the same feeling. My friend, she calls it hearth magic first and foremost. And I just got this Vesta vibe. It's like that vibe of like someone that's tending the sacred fires and they're holding it down. And I looked at her chart, and lo and behold, she has Vesta conjunct her south node in Taurus. So I won't go any further than that, but I just it the more one looks at this, the more we start to get a feel for it. And I think the feel itself is even more inclusive than the knowledge. There's so much that we're just beginning to discover about these archetypes, especially as we're like broadening our association beyond just the historical context of the past couple thousand years, right? Like there's so much depth to I think what we're remembering right now. And yeah, I would just encourage all of those who are interested and drawn just to keep on following the thread of your own journey and your own calling towards this learning, because it's rich and we're on the cusp of just so much remembering.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, talk to people that are maybe outside of your little bubble, right?
That's it. Yeah.
Our conversations have colored the way that I see Vesta in history, and I really appreciate just the different perspective that you can get talking to someone who isn't in your field of specialty. So I always encourage people to do that. Well, all right then. Ari, thank you so much. This has been so much fun.
Yeah.
Is
Have
there
a good day.
anything that you want to tell people about? Anything that you mentioned a course? I know I'll link your YouTube channel below. Is there anything else you want to let people know about?
Absolutely. And that course happens every year. And I have a self-study program that anyone can enroll in. And then you can join a live cohort in the future. Yeah, many opportunities from my website to study and practice this work with me or by yourself. I offer individual sessions for those that want to work with your own chart and kind of tune into the soul dynamics. I also have a weekly live stream class where right now I'm teaching on aspects to Neptune. So you can just check out all of that on my website and on my YouTube channel, Heart and Soul Centered Astrology.
Great. And like I said, I'll have all of those links down below. And as for me, I'm just going to be hanging out here as per usual. I've got more Vesta stuff for the Vestalia festival. So I guess I'll see everybody then. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you all so much for joining us. This is so much fun.
Thank you.